summer craft here. I have been asked by a work colleague of mine to make him a cheese board 3 feet long with a natural edge. So it just so happens that I have this board here, which again was from Point Peely, the same piece of wood that I used to make those 5 bowls from the other day. It's not particularly highly figured, but it's a nice piece of wood nonetheless. With a natural edge, with food you have to remove the bark because that's where bacteria will be harbored, so we don't want that. So I started the other day with another piece of wood that I was going to use with my old thickness planer, which is now sitting right there, and that thickness planer decided to bite the dust and let the magic smoke out, so I ended up having to go out and buy myself a new one. This is a King Canada thickness planer. It's 13 inches wide and up to 6 inches high. You can cut those boards on this. It has a helical cutter head, so it has 26 individual carbide tips, and you can turn each one to have 4 faces that will cut. So if you hit a nail, you can just turn that one cutter and you're good to go again. And you can purchase cutters to replace them at a reasonable cost anyway. So I'm going to bring this board down to about 1.25 inches, maybe 1.5 inches. Right now it's about 2 inches, so I'm going to take about 1 inch off, so like 1/2 inch from each side to square it up and make it flat. I'm going to cut the ends off to make it about 3.5 to 4 feet long on my bandsaw, and then we'll get it through the thickness planer. Now I did notice that I didn't get a snipe at all with this board. Snipe is when, as the wood exits, it moves and you get a dig in the one end. That's snipe, and I did not notice that when I put this board through the thickness planer, which is fantastic. So I'm hoping not to get snipe, but if I do, I'll have a little excess at both ends that I can trim off at the end if I do get snipe. Okay, so looking at this board, I have some splitting back here which I want to eliminate, and I have a couple of knots here which I'll probably end up putting some super glue and coffee granules in, and over here there is some figure with a crack in it. I'd rather save this figure with the crack in it than these cracks down here. So I think actually what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put the whole thing through the thickness planer, because it's only about another 8 inches at each end that I'm concerned about, or that I want to get rid of, so I'm not too worried if I thickness them down as well. And that can be my snipe ends if I have it at all. So I'm going to get this thing through the thickness planer, and then we'll cut it to the length we want afterwards. Okay, so I've got this board now down to 40mm, which is just over 1.5 inches, and I'm thinking I'm going to end up taking some more off to get it a bit thinner. I have to remove the bark, and I have a couple of inclusions which I was hoping not to have, and the board is going to be approximately this length in total when it's finished. There's a small crack there, and I'm going to fill that with super glue and coffee granules, and I'm going to do the same thing here with this. I may actually not use coffee granules, I may use some sawdust from this wood in here, in this one, but coffee granules in this one here, I think that's the best bet at this point. But there is some nice figure in this, and once it gets oiled up I think it's going to be quite nice after it's sanded down to a fine finish. I think the most difficult part is going to be removing the bark, because this was a winter cut tree. No, it wasn't. Yes, it was. It was a winter cut tree, which means it's retained its bark, which it has. And I have to try and remove that, ideally. So it really is quite a simple process. I've got a jar of coffee granules here, and I'm just going to sprinkle some of those into the small crevices, which are basically here and over here. I just want to get them down into the crevices. Wipe off the excess and then soak that with thin CA. And then I can even put some more on as it gets soaked into the wood. And I just have some really fine sawdust here that I'm going to put into this little crack. I don't really want to put coffee granules in that one. Just to fill that up, and then we're going to just drizzle a little bit of thin CA in there, let that soak in. Okay, so here I have my board now. It is thickness plain down to 1.5 inches, and I think that that is a pretty decent thickness for a cheese board or a cutting board. It's nice and chunky, which is what I kind of think I want. They want something that's natural edge and rustic, so that's what they're going to get. So I'm going to decide my 3-foot length is going to be right here, which will eliminate that crack, which is perfect, and it's going to be just after that crack, which is okay. And then this is all going to get sanded down to well, I'm not sure what yet, 600 at least, maybe more, nice and smooth. I have 12,000. I may sand down to 12,000. Taking this bark off is still going to be quite the chore, so what I'm going to do right now is cut the 2 ends off so it's the right length, and then go from there. Okay, so if you can see this, I've sanded this down to 400 grit. There's a couple of areas that I'm not completely happy with, so I may have to go back and do more sanding. But I started at 220 grit and worked my way up to 400 grit. It's actually very smooth. So actually what I'm going to do though now is apply some oil and then wet sand this. I find, as always, that that will show up any marks, and wet sanding creates less dust. So I was at 400. I'm actually going to go back to 220 and wet sand at 220. I still have to remove the bark as well, which I probably should have done before I started sanding, but I just wanted to get some sanding done in preparation for the final finish. Okay, so I have got this sanded down to 1000 grit, and it's very smooth, and I'm really liking the colorations in this piece of wood now. I was concerned that it would be too pale, but it's actually got some nice figure in it, and with the CA glue and coffee grinds, it kind of highlights these features right here. And there is a small crack here, but that's okay. I put some sawdust and some super glue in there. I considered putting the coffee granules in, but I decided against it for this crack. But some beautiful figurations here and here. So because this is being used for food, I'm going to have to remove this bark, which I'm really not looking forward to. This log, when I received it, was winter cut, so it's retained its bark. The bark is not falling off. Had this been cut in the spring or summer, the bark would have just fallen off by now, and you'd have a perfectly smooth, beautiful wood edge to both sides of it. So it's going to be difficult actually to remove. thanks for watching. This week's project is a cheese board. It is 3 feet long by 6 to 8 inches wide across, with the bark removed so that there's no bacteria that's going to grow in there. It's beautifully smooth, sanded down to 1200 grit by hand, and with the pyro on the underside. Now I have put feet on the underside now. They're rubber feet, and it did in fact warp on me just a little bit after I put it through the thickness planer. So what I've done is I've just shimmed up the 2 corners with a washer under each foot. No big deal. Right now it's perfectly perfectly balanced when it's on one surface. But I hope your soulmate enjoys this as much as I enjoyed making it, and thank you very much for asking me to make it for you guys. I did enjoy it. So Merry Christmas everybody, have a good New Year, and I will see you in the next video. Take care now.